Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm really excited to have you here for Rose Foundation's 2025 Grassroots Convening, Money for the Movement Grant Writing Fundamentals. My name's Aurora. I'm the Program Officer for our Grassroots Grant Making here at Rose Foundation. We're a small environmental foundation based in Oakland, California. We're dedicated to supporting grassroots initiatives that inspire community action, to protect nature and people's rights. And I know how daunting and obscure and unapproachable the world of philanthropic fundraising can be. And that makes me very happy to be able to bring you this series on grant writing strategies. Today's session is an overview of grant seeking and everything that you need to have in place in order to begin looking for grant funding. It's the first of 4 sessions. So for the next 3 Fridays, we're going to be here with more workshops focusing on funder prospecting and on budgets and financials for your grant proposals. And then we're going to finish the series at the beginning of November with a live grant review panel where you'll hear from real program officers who will review applications and give advice about what makes a strong grant proposal. So I hope you'll join us for some of those sessions. And I'm going to get us started today by passing things over to Dahlia Masachi, our trainer for today. Dahlia is a grant writer, a longtime organizer, and she's going to walk us through the lessons of Grant Writing 101. So we're super grateful to have her. And thanks to all of you again for spending your time with us today. Dahlia, are you ready? I'm going to pass it to you to start us off.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much, Aurora and all at Rose Foundation for having me. I will go ahead and share my screen in hopes that it will work. Can I get a thumbs up? Everything looks good? Okay, awesome. I think I am going to turn off my video just because there may be some bandwidth issues. So let's get started. All right, well, again, welcome everybody to Introduction to Grant Writing, the first of 3 presentations that I will be offering for you all. And yes, you can do it successfully. I'm going to ask you to type in the chat your organization's topic or issue, up to 5 words, just so I know who's here. And I'm going to ask Aurora or Timothy to just read out loud who we've got here, what kinds of issues we're dealing with.
I'm saying all kinds of stuff, including public lands, open space, climate, ready home improvement, renewable energy, marine ecology, environmental justice, food access.
Wow, that's quite a bit, quite a broad range, but there definitely is a through line there. And it applies to Rose in terms of environment and communication. So thank you all for giving me a sense of the breadth here. And I wanted to let you know that no matter if you are brand new to grant writing, or if you've been doing it for a while and you're just looking for tips on how you can improve that work, or preparing to attract more or larger grants for your organization, today's webinar is for you. It's always a good idea to make sure your organization is optimized for grant seeking and ready to apply when grant opportunities present themselves, which we will be talking about grant opportunities presenting themselves next time. So yeah, thumbs up on that. You may already know a little bit about me. I've been a nonprofit writer, speaker, and coach for about 25 years. I worked with organizations like yours to raise millions of grant dollars on a wide range of social and environmental issues like you're all working on. I've also authored an award-winning book called Writing to Make a Difference. And I've edited several other books. And right now, I'm the part-time executive producer of a podcast called Everyday Climate Champions. You can get that on all podcast platforms if you're interested. Here's the agenda for today. We're going to discuss how to prepare for grant writing the right way. And if you want to maximize your grant seeking efforts, you need to prepare your organization to be worthy of a grant maker's investment. And that's what this first webinar is all about. You'll see that we're going to go through our grants right for you right now. They may or may not be. We're going to be looking at that. Then we're going to look at the grant journey from the beginning to the end. We will talk about knowing your organization's real objectives. You may think you want to know, but we're going to go through that. Then we're going to go through what I call the 8 information essentials. We're going to talk about how to optimize your grant team, even if it's a team of 1. We'll look at your proposal plan, and finally, we'll do a quick review of the workbook, which I have shared, and I believe Aurora has already shared with you all. That is available in English and Spanish as well. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to please type in your questions or comments in the chat box whenever you'd like, whenever during this webinar. I will get to them as time permits. We do have time set aside at the end of today's session for your questions. My request is to make sure that your questions are applicable to as many people in our webinar as possible, not just you. Thank you. And let's go on. All right, so the first question here is, are grants right for you? Let's first look at some things you need to consider before jumping into grant seeking mode. The idea here is that if you're not really ready to start in the grant world, you're just going to waste a lot of time and energy and maybe even money, and I don't want you to do that. I've seen many nonprofit organizations make the mistake of not preparing, and then they suffer the consequences. So please don't skip this step. You need to know what grants are good for and what they're not good for, and what information, people, and other resources you're going to need to be successful. So that's what we're going to be talking about here.
Dahlia, before we
Yes.
keep going, can we double check the screen share? I think it's cutting off a little portion of the PowerPoint slide.
Is that better?
No, I didn't change anything. Why don't we try restarting the screen share?
Okay.
Oh, now it's a little more centered. That did help.
That did help. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that okay to wait like that?
Yeah, we can see the whole thing. It is kind of small, but it is all visible now.
Okay. I'm not sure how to make it bigger for you. Is it legible?
Yeah, I think this will do.
Okay. All right, great. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about here is the grants usually take up to 6 to 12 months to be awarded after you apply. So that's like the first consideration to think about the timing. You probably will need money before then, right? So it's something that you want to think about. During the COVID-19 pandemic, there were some grants that were faster than that. There were emergency or rapid response grants, but that's not really how grants go at this point. So I want to encourage you to really think about the timing. Oftentimes people in the nonprofit sector, maybe even board members, might think about grants as the way to go because they don't realize that there's such a lag in time. So I do want you to keep that in mind when you're, as kind of the first consideration. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay. The next point that I wanted to make is your organization needs a strategy to ensure that you can survive or thrive during any during the wait for a grant and after the grant, right? So beyond the grant period, as we call it. While grants can and should be part of your mix, you can't expect them to be anything more than a short-term fix for maybe a year or two, maybe 3 if you're lucky. If they end up being long-term, you'll be pleasantly surprised. But don't think of grants as a long-term strategy per grant. Sometimes organizations kind of live grant to grant, and that can be a problem. It's kind of like living paycheck to paycheck if you don't have a guaranteed job. So it's not a good idea to do that if you can help it. Okay. It's important to remember that grant makers often change their priorities, and that can be unreliable for us because we have no control over that, right? For example, many funders have recently refocused their priorities on aspects of racial justice, climate change, and other hot topics. So if your work isn't directly related to that, to those areas, it's important to think about how can you fit, or maybe you don't fit. And that's okay if you don't fit, because there are many grantors out there. You don't have to stick with the same ones that you know of. You don't want your organization to be dependent on only 1 or 2 grants because they can disappear, right? Again, because of the grant makers changing their priorities all the time. You can protect your organization's well-being by having many different sources of income in case the grants suddenly slow down or dry up. And what are some ideas for other sources of income? Those might include major individual donors, community events, fees for services that your organization provides, or social enterprises or social businesses that your organization might run. So I encourage you to think about grants as part of a larger picture. Okay. Let's see. Moving down here. Again, part of a larger puzzle. Okay. You may know that the vast majority of grants are given for specific programs or projects. You probably have already experienced that. The other types of revenue that I just mentioned, those are usually far more flexible than grants are. So you can use other types of money, not grant money, but other types of money for general operating support or anywhere you want in your organization. Grants are often restricted to the program or the project that you're asking money for. The good news is that more and more funders are making general operating support grants. It's still rare, but it is starting to happen. So that's a good thing in the grant world. I wanted to encourage you to really think about the costs and benefits of grants because grants are not free money. Some people talk about grants, hey, it's free money, but it's actually not. There's a lot of work that goes into seeking and managing different types of grants, different sizes of grants. Your organization has to decide if it's worth dedicating all of the time and the effort and all of the other resources you need in exchange for the possible cash you get from the grant. So I am, again, encouraging you to think about cost versus benefits. Some grants also come with strings attached. So you have to consider if the agreement that you're making when you accept the money is actually worth it for the expenses that the grant will cover. So these are things to consider. And okay, so now let's say you've thought it through, you've decided, yes, I want to pursue grants despite all of the limitations that we just talked about. Um, Great. Okay, so now that you're ready to think about the grant journey, and um, grants will be a strategic part of your funding structure. Let's talk about what to expect as you engage in this journey. Now, this graphic is in English. The next slide will be a Spanish version of this. So I'm going to go through the English version, and then when you can look at the Spanish slide afterwards, but also in the slides will be sent to you afterwards. Okay, so if you notice here, the first thing in blue is draft your LOI. LOI stands for letter of intent or letter of interest. So I'll just say LOI for the future. But if you notice, the first thing is not here in the blue. It's above where it says ongoing. Here this is ongoing research funders, and you'll be cultivating relationships with funders. If you notice, it's in the background throughout this graphic, and there's a reason for that. It has to be ongoing all the time, kind of in the background. So before you get to the first blue stage, you will be doing some of the other work, but we'll be talking about that in webinar 2. So for now, let's start with the first blue where it says submit your LOI, your letter of intent, or your proposal. So let's just say, so you submit it, and again, we'll talk about all that goes into it before you submit it, but then it goes to the next stage, which is the program officer, or PO. That person is usually the gatekeeper, the first person to review your documents after
Elizabeth, I think you're in the English channel at the moment. Sorry, Dahlia.
Okay, all right,
Carry on.
Okay. All right, so I was talking about the program officer, the PO, in this graphic, who reviews your LOI or your proposal, whichever has been submitted, whichever they've requested. So it's your job to make it as easy for your program officer as possible to get behind your work and quickly talk about it to the other people at the foundation or the grant maker. So that relationship with your PO is super important, and again, we'll talk about that in a bit. The next blue phase is the PO. You answer all the PO's questions. The program officer is going to ask you questions. If they do, then that indicates that they're interested, which is great. So again, you want to make it as easy for them as possible by answering all of their questions in a timely manner. The next place you go is the program officer advocates for you. Okay, that is wonderful. That's exactly where you want to be. That means that they believe in you, they understand that you've answered all their questions. They usually are not the person at the foundation who's going to decide on your grant. That entity is usually the board of trustees. So again, if you cultivate that relationship with your PO, then they can advocate for you to the board, which is the next phase. So the board votes on your proposal. Let's hope that that you have provided your program officer with enough information to help them guide the board, and the board will decide. Ultimately, again, we don't have control over what the board does. So we do what we can to make sure that they have what they need. All right. Well, unfortunately, sometimes it will go into the red. And you won't get the grant this time. At that point, it's a good idea to ask your program officer if they have any feedback for you to help you be successful the next time. And again, that is another place where it's important for you to have cultivated a relationship already with your program officer. But let's say it goes to green, and yes, you win the grant. So congratulations. It's now time to thank the grant maker for the grant, sign the grant agreement, etc. And you move on to the next green stage, which is implement your project. You have to make sure that everything you're implementing is exactly what you promised in the proposal. Then, after the project is complete, or maybe halfway in, you report outcomes to the grant maker. And finally, when the grant is over, because you've cultivated that relationship over time, now you can explore opportunities to renew or reapply. There may be another project that you'd like to fund that is not exactly the same as what you were funded for before. So it's a good idea to have that discussion with your program officer if at all possible. Okay. Again, I'm just going to note that ongoing in the background, you have researching and cultivating relationships. And those things will be talked about in a little bit. Okay. Let's go on to the next one. This is the Spanish version. I'll just give the Spanish speakers a little bit to kind of look at that and notice the blue, red, and green. Okay. All right. I think I'm going to move on. Okay. So our next focus is to know what your proposal's real objectives are. Sometimes people think about, hey, I know what my objectives are. I want to get the money, right? And that is definitely a larger goal that you'd like, what you're looking for. But I encourage you to dig deeper, to think about what considerations go into the funder's decision and how you can best position your work to be attractive to them. So that's really, it's what I like to say is really trying to establish when you're trying to get them to agree with you, to say yes to your grant. Let's do a brief poll here. What do you think funders expect their grant funding to accomplish?
All right, I'll give you all 10 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll.
What?
Can you all see the results now? Dahlia, can you see it?
Yep, I can see the results. Okay, so we've got a pretty good split here. But I'm also noticing that there's a large majority, 78% of people said all of the above. And that is what I would agree with you on that. Funders are trying to do all of these things: help address a pressing need, support strategic service or movement, show positive results in a reasonable time frame, and possibly be even more effective than they initially planned. All of those are on the minds of funders. Okay, I think I'm gonna, all right. So, move on here. Yes. Okay, so your proposal is aiming to show the grant maker that they should take a risk, by investing in you, because you will use their grant dollars to make the impact they are seeking in the short term and the long term. If you really think about it, if you're considering making an investment of any kind, you probably would be looking for a good return on your investment, right? And that's the same thing that grant makers are doing. So every grant maker has specific goals that they are trying to achieve with their philanthropy beyond the general goals that we just talked about, as well as values or ideas that guide them when they're making funding choices. They want to fund projects that will fit into their grant portfolio. So I encourage you to think about the funder in terms of, hey, they have a grant portfolio and I want my grant to fit into that. They're looking to make progress in a larger sense, right? And your organization and your project can help them make that progress. Okay, so the whole idea here is you really are looking for a great match between you and the funder, and you want to show them that or give them evidence of that being true. You also want to inspire them, right? You want to share fresh ideas that you bring to the table. I wouldn't say they're jaded, but I would say that they've seen a lot, right? They've been around the block, they've seen quite a bit, and they want to be inspired by your proposal. So please don't disappoint them. Your proposal should show them a vision of what you're working toward, not just where you are right now, but what you are creating. Let's see. Part of that is instilling trust, right? You want them to trust you to get the job done. If the funder is unfamiliar with your organization's work, you're going to need to make it clear that you are trustworthy. And you want to demonstrate your integrity, your transparency, and your accountability in delivering on your promises. You want to show that you're structurally sound and that you're here for the long haul. You're not just here and then you go somewhere in a year or two. Even if you've already shown them something about yourself, even if they already know, they may not yet believe you that you can be trusted. So that part of your proposal's objectives are to really show them that you are trustworthy, to give them some evidence. A proposal should also follow up on any funder cultivation that you've done. And I tried to emphasize a little bit in important piece of this that should be going on as much as possible throughout the whole process. If your organization has done a good amount of that, then sometimes people do so much of it that a proposal is just kind of a formality after the conversation that they've had with a funder. I highly recommend having as much conversation with a funder as possible before you submit. So your written LOI or your grant proposal is likely to provide the details and the documentation that they need. In that case, the proposal would actually help seal the deal, which is exactly what you want to do. Okay, so we've talked about how you use grants to strategically ensure your organization's sustainability. You've reviewed what to expect on the grant journey, and we've also established what each grant proposal is trying to do on a broader level. Now let's look at what it takes to make your proposal's objectives and to meet your proposal's objectives that we've just talked about, and to show funders that your organization is well positioned to seek and manage grants. And I use the name 8 Essentials to help me think about that. You need to show that your organization is credible, it's well run, and it's able to use whatever grants it gets very effectively. Okay, so let's go through these 8. So the first one is official documentation. And my guess is that you probably already have some of this lined up in terms of your IRS, 501c3. You may have a fiscal sponsor. You may be a 501c4, and that's okay for some funders. It depends on the funder. At a minimum, you're going to want to have those certifications on the federal and state levels. And sometimes in some areas, you're also required to do a county or a city business license or other documentation. Some grant makers are only interested in organizations that have officially been in existence for at least a few years. And if that's the case, and if you're not quite there yet, that's okay. You could just wait a little bit and approach other funders, because as I've said, there are many, many funders out there. Tens of thousands, in fact. And we'll be talking about that next time. Okay, so second is your mission. You want to have your mission to be as unique as possible and clear as possible. Think about how your organization plays a special or a unique role in your field. Sometimes I've seen mission statements that are kind of vague, or they could really represent any other organization. When I see that, I ask them to go back to the drawing board and really think about, again, how are you unique in the work that you do? It may be you're in a specifically underserved area that you're work in. It may be, some way that you're approaching your work is unique. There has to be something there that is so clear that you can express it and anyone can really understand it quickly. Okay. Number 3 is you'll need an active, financially supportive board of directors. And when I say financially supportive, what do I mean by that? It means that they are giving something. They're giving, sometimes we call that give or get. So they're giving a financial contribution, or they're helping you get the financial contributions that your organization will need. It's best to have a good variety of folks on your board who are familiar with the various parts of your organization. If you have some people on your board who are current or former clients, or if they're representative of the ethnic and social economic communities that you're serving, you're already off to a great start. Funders are very interested in that. We know that they're interested in racial justice issues, and they will probably ask you about the composition of your board. So keep that in mind. Number 4, strong financial structure. Financial infrastructure. We'll be talking about this a little bit more in webinar 3, but essentially you will need to be able to regularly produce several financial documents, including budgets, expense reports, tax filings, balance sheets, etc. I used to have a client who had a math phobia, and she started her nonprofit as a fiscally sponsored project for that reason, because she wanted her fiscal sponsor to deal with all of the financial tracking aspects of the organization. Eventually, they became their own 501c3 when they became a little bit stronger in that area. So I'm just gonna move on to number 5, because number 4 we're going to talk about a little bit more in webinar 3. But I did want to mention that new funders will not want to pour money into a shaky or sinking ship, right? So you want to demonstrate that you are as financially sound as you possibly can be. Okay, number 5. You're going to need to be prepared to talk about at least one priority program that comes with a budget. And the key word here is priority. I don't like to see it when organizations come up with different programs or projects that are actually not priorities. So it's important to think about your organization's priorities over the next 1 to 2 years. You can then divide that work into specific programs or projects that will come with a budget. They're kind of like a bite-sized chunk that a funder can understand and fund specifically. If your organization is very new, you may only have one program to start with. That's okay. But even in that case, I encourage you to break it down into pieces as much as you possibly can. For example, some funders have specific geographic areas that they fund. So I would encourage you to think about, hey, maybe our work can be chopped into different segments that will serve different areas that different funders will fund. Or you may be dealing with a large issue that, again, you can break up into different pieces. Let me give you an example of that. This is an organization called Acta Non Verba Youth Urban Farm. They actually used to be a grantee of the Rhodes Foundation many years ago. They run a youth urban farm with seasonal camps and a community-supported agriculture program. It's a little micro enterprise, another source of income for them. They position their work to appeal to many different funder interests, and they package it into 1-year grant periods. Now, to them, internally, they have a certain system of the way they think about their work, the different program names or whatever. But when they're thinking about going after grants, they think about what are some specific areas of work that their organization covers. And I listed some of them here. And they do environmental education, they do food access, youth development, workforce preparation, etc. So again, this is an example of how you can think about chopping your work up into different areas that funders may be interested in funding. I did want to just mention that your priority program needs a plan, right? It needs to be specific, realistic plan, a specific and realistic plan for intern.
We lost her.
Sorry,
Lost
folks.
her?
Looks like we lost Dahlia. Dahlia, are
Hello?
you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Great. You went on, yeah, somehow you got on mute, but
That's
we
weird.
can hear you now.
Okay, I'm not sure how that happened.
You're back. That's all that matters.
Okay, I'm back. Yeah. All right. So yeah, I hope you heard me talking about how your priority program needs a plan that is specific and realistic. Now, I did want to point out here that your work doesn't have to be groundbreaking, right? It doesn't have to be based on an innovative or experiential idea. It's okay if it's not. But it has to be unique, and it has to show that you are pushing the envelope in some specific way. Again, before I said could be geographically, it could be with the approach that you're taking, etc. Something that makes it stand out. Okay. A few other great plan characteristics that I wanted to point out here. If you're involving your beneficiaries, the community that you're working in, if they are helping plan and implement the solution, that is something you want to talk about. if it's if your work can be replicated or adapted to different situations, that's again something you want to talk about. And finally, if it involves collaborative efforts with other organizations, and you're playing a unique role in that collaborative work, that's something that you want to point out to funders. We talked about, I mentioned that your priority programs need to have budgets, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail in webinar 2. Number 6, 6 of the information essentials is your methods of evaluation. Funders really want to know the quantitative results of your work, that is the numbers, right? How many people you served, how many items you took care of in terms, I don't know, if you were doing cleanups, for example, how much garbage you were able to collect or prevent. And so that's the quantitative results of your work. And there's also the qualitative, or the quality of the impact that your work is making. Funders often call these measurable outcomes. So it's important to reflect back to them how you're going to measure your work. And again, this goes back to the trust thing that I talked about earlier. If you can show how you're measuring and that you're showing your outcomes, that will help them trust you, that you know what you're doing and that you can get the work done. Okay, let's see. Let's move on to the next. Okay, but you don't actually have to be 100% successful 100% of the time, which is good. What mistakes have you made? What are you learning from those mistakes, right? So all of that information can be very valuable to a funder. So I encourage you to measure and evaluate your work, even if you are learning things that you shouldn't have done or that you should improve next time. Number 7 is your track record of success. Now you're gonna want to show how your organization has already made a positive difference in your community. That is the results that you've already seen. What if your organization is new though? What if you don't have a track record for your organization? Then I would encourage you to talk about the track record of your leadership or the community partners that you are going to be working with. Okay. And finally, number 8, essential, is a strategic plan of some kind. Now, even if you don't have a full-blown strategic planning process, your board and staff can at least envision a general outline of where you're headed over the next 1 to 3 years. This is especially important if you're seeking a multi-year grant or you're looking to increase your organization's capacity to achieve a strategic goal in the near future. Again, it doesn't need to be fancy. You just need to demonstrate that your work is coherent and realistic over 1 to 3 years. If you do, by any chance, have a formal strategic plan, definitely talk it up. Funders want to know about that. Okay, let's do another little poll here. Which of the 8 informational essentials would you most like to strengthen in order to make your organization or your project more fundable?
Okay, I'm gonna give it 5 more seconds.
All right.
All right, I'm gonna end the poll.
All right, again, we have a nice spread here. Okay, all right, great. So it looks like more people, the kind of the pluralities here, or the larger groups, include people who are interested in quantitative and qualitative evaluation. Yes, that is super important, and I'm glad to hear that at least that over a quarter of the people here are interested in strengthening that. And then we have 11% that are looking at priority program with its own budget. Nice. Okay, so you're thinking about maybe dividing up your work into specific programs or projects. And then we have, let's see, 90% are thinking about a strategic plan of some kind. Okay, nice. Yeah, the other ones are perfect. I'd like to see that some people are thinking about looking at their track record, which is nice. Okay, and then we've got a few people thinking about appropriate finances. We'll be talking about that in webinar 3. And I really like that active, financially supportive board of directors. Nearly a fifth of people were interested in that, so that's excellent. We even have a few people with thinking about their mission, how it can be a little bit more clear and unique. Great, thank you. All right. Okay, got that. Okay, perfect. All right, let's move on. Oops. Okay, so now that we've thought about the 8 informational essentials, I suggest thinking about what I call the next level of information that grant makers are going to want to see. The more information you can provide them, the more you're going to impress them. So even if it's not explicitly requested, I would encourage you to attach supplementary documents if you're allowed to. And I would recommend a few of these next level items on my slide here. Okay, so these are some documents that will, again, impress funders that, hey, you already have them. They may ask for them or they may not. So I'll just give you a couple seconds to look through this list here. Okay, so it's a good idea, again, to have them on hand. If if you have them, great, keep them organized and ready to send out to funders. And if you don't have these, you might think about developing them over time. Okay, remember, each funder is different, and they're going to have different criteria beyond the general criteria of what funders are looking for. So there are many things that you'll need to think about specific to each individual funder. So it's not like you do it and you're done. You have to tweak it or customize it for each funder. And in webinar 2 next time, we're going to be thinking more closely about this concept. So let's talk about what I call the grant team. That is people who are working together on this grant seeking journey. By now, you probably realize that all of this work takes a lot of time and talent. So let's talk about putting together a grant dream team. So let's take a quick poll here. How many people are prepared to be on your organization's grant team? And think about staff, board, volunteers.
All right, give it 5 more seconds. All right, I'm gonna end the poll. Sharing the results.
Okay. All right. That's actually better than I thought it was gonna. I thought it was gonna be mostly one-person grant teams, but it's not. We've got a lot of people, more than half, have 2 to 3 people on their grant team, which is awesome. And then we have some people who even have 4 to 5. And then we even have maybe a couple people with, or a few people with more than 5. That's excellent. And then for the people who have a grant team of 1, we have about 12%, which is fine. That's a good place to start. So thank you all for sharing that. I'm so glad to hear that it's more that we have so many people on the grant team here. Okay. So for those folks, the minority of folks out there who are just one-person teams, I would encourage you to think about other people with within the organization or affiliated with the organization who might play strategic roles at different times. We're going to go through the different roles. And remember that everyone can play more than one role. So people with more than one person on the team, each person, it's not just one person, one role. So each person can think about playing a different role. Maybe some of them are smaller roles at different times, strategically timed. So let's look at what that looks like. Okay. So the grant team is what I call the organization's capacity for working with grants. So let's talk about the different skill sets that will be part of this team effort. Okay. Remember that while most team roles will be played by staff members, again, you may also be able to draw in outside experts or collaborators or board members or even volunteers at certain times. Okay. So the first person is the grant team leader. This is usually a grant professional. And this person makes sure that everyone basically is on the same page, kind of like the conductor of the orchestra. This person is often the glue that binds the different parts of the team together during the grant process. I've found that many times the people I'm working with are very thankful to have one person take the lead. So I highly recommend that. Each team member is going to carve out their specialties, right? And the grant leader is also going to monitor how appropriate each grant opportunity is. So they're kind of managing both the people and the grant process and the grant opportunity at the same time. Okay, so in addition to the grant leader, we have some other roles. The program specialist, right? So to get started, you're going to need a program specialist that outlines the vision for the prioritized program or project. Okay, I think someone just accidentally unmuted. Okay, so the program specialist is going to be very involved in creating and reviewing proposal drafts for accuracy. The next role is the community needs assessor. And that person is going to help establish why the program or project is so crucial in the first place, right? That critical piece should embrace as much community involvement as possible. After all, who would be better positioned to know the issues, right? The people on the ground. So that's what the community needs assessment is going to be focused on. Now, you also will need an evaluator, and I was pleased to see that so many people are interested in beefing this part up or strengthening your role, your work in evaluation. as the program is being developed, that has to be built in, right? You have to think about how you're going to determine a feasible way to track and measure your program's effectiveness. Once the program is funded, you'll need to have someone monitor the implementation and evaluation of it. So when it's time to prepare your proposal and to report on your progress to the funder, this person will be very important. Okay, another grant team role is the success story collector, right? You need someone to think about how are we going to collect stories from and testimonials from people who are involved in this work. We want to know just not only what they did, but how they or their community benefited from the project. So this, again, is important for funders to know. This is part of the evaluation process. You'll need a budgeter or a financial tracker, which we will talk about that a little bit, extensively in webinar 3. But again, this is just to kind of repeat the fact that you have to ensure your financials are appropriately documented before and after funding. And of course, it's important to funders. Administrative assistant is often involved in the grant seeking process. They are going to be needed to provide lots of information, or maybe even, legal, technical, clerical support. You will need a funder researcher. I kind of mentioned before that it's an ongoing process to be able to be looking into potential funders. Again, we're going to be talking about that in webinar 2. Relationship cultivator. Sometimes I call this the schmoozer. The person to initiate and maintain relationships with potential and existing funders. And one last role that I think is super important here is probably your executive director, could be, people on the board. Basically, they are the strategic supporter that provides the resources and the inspiration to facilitate grant success. It's actually an important part of their job. So without their strong support and vision, your grant team is likely to lose direction, priorities, and motivation. So I encourage you to think about this person as being part of the grant team. Okay, so at that, there's kind of another place for the grant team leader to come in here. Toward the end, they're acting as the final editor, right? They're representing the curious funder who doesn't really know that much about your organization. So the team leader kind of puts on the funder's hat to represent them, right? Coming from the outside. So taking that perspective might be a little bit challenging, but it can be helpful from time to time to call in a third party if you need that to give you some feedback, and we can talk about that a little bit later in webinar 2. Okay. So that sounds kind of like a lot of roles, right? Again, if you're a team of 1 or 2, you're filling a lot of those roles at different times. Remember that you can get others involved and you can pace it out, because not all of those things need to be done at the exact same time. I did want to point out that if you are a very small team, that actually can be helpful. It seems like a lot of work, but it can all have a flip side, which is you already have good access to the information that you're going to need. You're close to the action in prioritizing, implementing, monitoring, evaluating, and reporting on the grant. So you're kind of right there on the ground. And you can recognize when a collaborator might strengthen your grant applications. So all of that is something to keep in mind no matter what size your team is. Okay, let's look through a proposal plan, and I like to use a five item list here called that spells out first FIRST. The F is for facts and figures. This basically answers the questions who, what, when, and where, right? So you're describing the context that you're working in and the problem you're addressing. This is often a great place to look at both overall numbers and statistics, as well as a couple profiles of clients. This is actually one of the easiest parts of doing a proposal for us in the nonprofit sector because we live it every day, right? We're very familiar with the facts and figures of the problem. The I is for importance of the issue. This can be a little more challenging for us, again, because we're living it every day. We don't think about, oh, well, someone outside of our world might not understand the importance of it, right? So you can imagine them coming to you and saying, so what? What would happen if you didn't do your work? Why does it matter? This is something that you are going to have to be very clear about with funders. Again, why should they care? The R is for results that you envision, what your success is going to look like in both the short term and the long term. Now, again, as we talked about before, the impact needs to be very measurable, both quantitatively and qualitatively. And if you need help to think about the results that you're envisioning, you might want to go back to your mission statement and cut it down to size to fit the specific proposal and the specific grant period that you're working on. The S is for the solution you're proposing. This is probably a fairly easy part for us in the nonprofit sector because we've thought about specifically how our organization is going to tackle the problem. Specific services, programs, processes. This is basically the solution that you will implement to achieve your results. But remember, we need lots of details here. Funders need details. They want to know why you chose the specific solution that you did when there are lots of ways to tackle the same problem. And finally, the T for track record. How has your organization or project already made a positive difference in your community? Sometimes T can stand for testimonials also. Yeah, okay. I was just noticing the English and Spanish here. Okay, great. FIRST. We'll come back to this. So you don't have to kind of memorize it, but just so you know, FIRST is first. Okay, so the R in there was really important. I wanted to emphasize that the bottom line for funders is the R, the results, right? How will your solution lead to results for the community? How does your work lead to something better for them? And what's in it for us, the community? Don't forget the budget. Again, we'll be talking about this in webinar 3, but I did want to bring it up again that when you're doing a proposal, it's not just the narrative part or the text, it's also the budget. These two pieces have to be aligned and they have to both be realistic and consistent. Let's do poll question 4. What do you find to be the most challenging part of creating a grant proposal?
Let me give it 2 more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. These are our results. A lot of people for budget. Good. Come to our third session.
All right. Are we counting that is done, Aurora? That poll? I
Sorry,
think we're
Dahlia, I didn't
going with
hear
it.
what you were
Okay.
saying. I think
All
you
right.
cut out.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hello? Yeah. Okay.
Can hear
Great.
you.
Well, we've got a good split here too. So I would say, yeah, it's close to like a quarter for each one. Gathering my organization's 8 informational essentials. Okay, we've got optimizing my grant team, planning my proposal, and developing the budget. Okay, great. So we've got a good split, and I'm hoping that for webinar number 3 will be helping you out with the developing the budget. The FIRST, hold that thought. The grant team, that's good. I'm hopeful that my outline of the different roles and skill sets will help you as you optimize your grant team. And finally, gathering the 8 information essentials. I'm loving that people are really noticing that. Okay, I am going to move on to show you a little bit on the workbook that I shared with you. And for me to do that, I'm going to have to stop sharing and then share again. Let's just scroll down a little bit. So this is the workbook. Okay, so table of contents, let's go up a little bit just to kind of show them the table of contents. Okay, so we've got, so it's divided into 3 sections, just like 3 sections correspond to the 3 webinars. So in part that we're just going to look at part 1 for today, and then we'll look at 2 and 3 later. So if you can scroll down just a little bit here. Okay, keep on going. Okay. So this first one is the 8 information essentials that we talked about. This is an opportunity for you to rate yourself in terms of how prepared you feel like you are. Keep on going, just in terms of the different things that you're going to have to put together for the different parts. Okay. This page shows the next level pieces that I talked about. Again, offering you some space to think about, to write down some notes about your organization's preparedness concerning these next level pieces. The workbook will be emailed. Yes. I saw that question come through. And then we have the outline of the grant team roles that I talked about. And again, there's space for you to write down who you're assigning them to. Okay, keep on going. Good, good. Okay. And then the 5 key elements, the FIRST that we talked about, again, gives you some opportunity to think through the different facts and figures, importance. Keep on going. Result, solution, and track record with testimonials. Then I offered you a generic proposal narrative template. So it's generic. Again, remember, you're going to have to tweak it for each individual funder, but this gives you a general outline of the types of things that will go into your proposal. If you notice, the pieces that fit with the FIRST, I put in green. So for example, track record is in green, facts and figures is in green, all of that is going to come directly out of your FIRST. Okay, keep on scrolling. It's a little bit slow on Zoom, I know. Keep on going, keep on going. All right, almost there. Okay, then I have a little it's kind of a funny piece, spot the weaknesses. If you scroll up, you scroll past it accidentally. Can you go up a little bit, Aurora, just a little bit?
Yeah,
Okay.
should be there now.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, yeah. So this is kind of a funny piece. It gives you a summary of the types of things that we've talked about. I'm not going to go into it now, but if you want a little chuckle, go for page 17. Okay, go on. Keep on scrolling. Okay. Then I offered my top 12 writing and editing tips to use for grant proposals. So we don't have time to go through them now, but I wanted to share that with you. And keep on going. A couple more pages left here in part 1. Okay, these are some free on page 20 and 21. I have some frequently asked questions that people have asked me before about grant proposals, so I offered the answers here. And I think page 22 might be the last one. Scroll down, scroll just a bit more. Okay, yeah. So this page is a glossary of grant writing terms that you probably will see a lot or at different times in the process. So I wanted to share that with you as well. And I think that is that, just scroll down just a little bit more.
Yes.
Can you
That's
go
just
about
part
just
2.
one more page? Yeah, there you go. Okay, that's the end. All right, so part 2 is next, but we won't talk about that today. But we'll save that for webinar 2. Okay. So let's see if I can share my screen again. Here we go. And share. Okay. All right. So that was the poll question 4 that we were looking at. And going down to the next one. Okay. So we reviewed the bit of the ebook or the workbook. I wanted to answer whatever questions may have come up during the webinar that I can answer today. If we have too many, I can talk about the answers at the beginning of webinar 2.
Yeah, so
Happy to do that.
Some of the questions from the chat. While you answer those, I'm going to put a brief survey into the chat so folks can give us some feedback about the session. We really appreciate it because it helps us improve. And Tim, I think you've been collecting questions. Could you share?
I sure have.
Share some of them with Dahlia?
Yeah. So Dahlia,
Okay.
yeah, we have a couple of questions. I'm going to start off with one of the first ones we received, which is sort of generally about how trust building is done. And I think it was particularly in the context of building trust with program officers, building relationships with folks of that nature. And yeah, what is sort of the ratio ideally in your mind between like face-to-face trust building and like on paper via email, like digital? Like what do you think the sort of right level of touches for those things, and what's the right ratio?
Well, first of all, I would say it's important to do as much of that as you can. And in terms of the ratio, I think it's going to vary by funder. Some funders allow you to have, face-to-face, in person, or on Zoom type of interactions with them. Some will say, no, we don't do that. Send me an email. And some will say, we don't even take emails. Go to, we have one webinar session that explains all of the requests for a proposal. So come to that. So that may be another opportunity for you, kind of in a group situation. Go to their information sessions, and then you can enter questions in the chat for that. So I would say it's just gonna vary by funder. But the most important takeaway there is to cultivate the relationship as much as you can.
Thanks, Dahlia. I have another question. That was from Lee McMurray. Thank you, Lee. Another question from Lillian McFarland. And so you mentioned a lot of different roles, budgetary, relationship building, so on and so forth. Can some of those roles mentioned be done by volunteers, or would you recommend it? Just a very practical question. I think a lot of our attendees today, many of the roles are filled by volunteers. But in terms of finding money for the movements, how much and to what extent would you recommend that these roles be filled by volunteers?
Yes, I think volunteers can be very helpful in these roles, especially if they have any background in developing business relationships, or maybe even writing or editing. That can be helpful as well. I just would recommend to not just kind of give them something to do and then never guide them. There has to be some guidance and good interaction between staff and volunteers, especially on this type of thing. So yes, I would say yes, they can be definitely central, but they need to be supported appropriately.
Thanks, Dahlia. We have another question. This one from Alice Sung. Let's cut to the question part. So, well, actually, I'll just read it in full here. So my new emerging fiscally sponsored program is looking to develop our strategic plan, but wonder if we need a facilitator rather than just our 3 to 5 board members and a few strategic advisors / partnerships. Do you recommend a third party to facilitate? Why or why not?
If you're very small and very new, my guess is that you don't have funds to hire an outside facilitator. So that would be my first guess. If you do have funds, I would say go for it. Remember, as I said, you don't have to have a fancy strategic plan or even a very formal one. So if you don't have the funds or capacity resources to get a third party person to help you with that, that's okay. You can do it on your own. Just doing it is the important piece here.
Thanks, Dahlia. And one last question, also very, very practical. So often applications come with a space for like an optional attachment. How many would you provide, Dahlia, and which would you prioritize?
That's a good question. Again, it's going to depend on your project and the funder. If you've picked up over the course of the application of what's important to them, then you want to use your supplementary information to give them more information in that line of thinking. So for example, if they seem to be very interested in your work in terms of the racial justice work that you're doing, I would include that in the supplementary information. If they're very interested in the micro pieces of your budget, or the financial aspect of your work, I'd include that in the supplemental information. They will often have restrictions in terms of how many supplementary pieces you can submit. So you are going to have to prioritize. But again, go back to what you think is important to them. And you may even get that information from the program officer, right? That you've been cultivating that relationship with. You can ask them, hey, I'd love to include supplementary information. What do you think is the most important for your board?
Thanks, Dahlia. And other folks, we have several other questions that we won't be able to get to this time, but I promise I've done my best to capture as many of those as we can, and I will make sure that we attempt to address them in future convenings, which is also a hook and a request that you come to future convenings.
And I want to emphasize that and ask you if you're interested to do this little homework for webinar 2 or before webinar 2 next week. Check out the workbook that I shared. Get started and 12. That will help you for next time because we're going to break up into small groups in webinar 2, and we're going to practice talking about our work. So the FIRST is going to help you do that, prepare for that. And finally, I wanted to ask if you could indulge me by typing in the chat, what is the most valuable thing you are taking away from today? I'd love to hear what are some of them, Timothy?
Expand my fundraising team, building next level data, first module, grant team roles, to focus on building my grant team. Oh, they're coming in too fast for me to read. Lots of stuff. Excited to look at the workbook, priority project structure, clarified roles in team, clear actionable steps in a simple, oh no, I lost it. Simple to read outline.
I love some of these are so practical, like the acronym of what we need to include, just like the like mnemonic
Great. Well,
device
people
of using
are
an acronym.
Yeah, wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you all. I'm glad
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you've
it
taken
helps a
things from
lot.
the session.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your close attention. I'm hearing that you
Yeah, wonderful. Well, we'll look forward to
some of
seeing many of you at
this is
future
just
sessions. We'll be here next Friday to talk about funder prospecting and researching the right kind of grants for your organization. And then the following Friday, we'll be talking about budgets and financials. So hope to see many of you there, and thank you for being here with us today. Dahlia, thank you so much for all of the valuable information that you shared, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Take good care.
Thank you very much, everybody, and please have a great weekend. See you next week.